What the hell? Was that really how Antonio Torres had died? If that was real, I definitely couldn't see Lisa being capable of that. But while I was still stunned, the classroom door suddenly slammed open. I've been eavesdropping, and I hate to admit it, because it does so spoil an entrance, but it's the truth. Everyone seemed so worked up I hesitated to enter. But not only did class never start, the discussion grew increasingly bizarre. Eventually it defeated even my patience. The boy at the door had a long thick tube of some sort held under his arm. It was none other than the lone Asian in the class, Tsukumojuku Kato, the most handsome, most intelligent, most bizarre boy in class. When he walked in, everyone, including the teacher, paid attention. He had that air about him. Everyone watched as Suku shut the door behind him, made his way to his desk, planted the case on the floor and turned to face us. I could have sworn I just solved the Antonio Torres case. So why do I get the sense it's only just begun? We all gasped. Solved it? Julius shrieked. What a load of crap! We found Antonio's body and the police had only just arrived when we left. That was less than an hour ago. You're not a cop. How would you even know he was dead? And here you are claiming to have solved the case. 'Cause I did. Suku said. But how? Julius said, at a loss for words. You know that. Because I'm a detective, Julio Gonzalez. I happened to pass the Torres residence mere moments after you came bursting out of it. Some would say fate brought me there, he added cryptically. Suku turned to look at me, but it seems fate is leading me in a different direction. As I stood my ground against his piercing stare, I wondered how he could speak in such a grown-up mannered fashion. Was he really 11? No. He hadn't had a birthday yet, so he was only 10. Then it struck me. This was the first time I'd ever talked to him face to face. I said, my voice shaking. So you solved the murder of Antonio Torres? Was Lisa involved? So I thought. Past tense? So you didn't? Instead of answering, he asked, George, have you ever read a detective novel? A detective novel? I think we have some in the house, but it's a genre of novels that began about 60 years ago in 1841, when the American writer Edgar Allan Poe published a story called The Murders in the Rue Morgue. The salient points of the genre, obviously, are that the murder appears to be impossible, and is then solved by a genius detective. Obviously? How would I know that? My mum said they weren't for children to read. I don't like scary books anyway, what's your point? But you understand the concept of a detective. Like Sherlock Holmes? Exactly. A fictional device. A role destined to always arrive at the truth in the end. So? That's me. Okay? So what? A detective surveys all evidence, understands the case in full, and at last arrives at a perfect solution. Looked at the other way, when new evidence comes to light providing details previously unknown, that solution is no longer perfect. And an imperfect solution is not the truth. What the hell was this Asian on about? Suko stood up and began moving around the classroom, closing the curtains. A new world lies before us, he announced. Facts previously hidden from view. My solution was not complete. I was wrong. The case is not done. With each of these last exclamations, he swished the curtain closed. In the darkened classroom with all eyes on him, he returned to his desk and picked up the tube he'd brought with him. This is very sensitive to sunlight and dry air, he explained, and pulled something out of it. He rolled it out on the desk. It was Antonio Torres, only flat. Holes where his eyes should be. Totally naked. Flat. Like paper. No blood, no muscle, no bones, nothing left of him but a sheet of skin. The very boy who said this let out a shriek of horror. What's wrong with you? Why would you bring a classmate's corpse here? The cops are going to be pissed. Oh God! Oh God! Suku didn't back tonight. I asked permission to keep it as a souvenir, and I granted this as an award for solving the case. No one will scold me for it. The flat Antonio Torres spread out on the desk had his chin up and turned slightly to the side, his eyes partly opened. He had no eyeballs, but it made him look like he was staring into the distance, lost in thought. His hands were held up in front of him, like he was trying to cover his bare chest, or trying to push something painful away. His hips were swiveled to one side as if trying to hide his little penis, and his knees and ankles and toes were all curled as well, like he was dancing. He'd been tormenting me on a daily basis for years, but this was beautiful. Are you sure it's not a painting? I said. That is the solution I arrived at, George. Or should I say, Jorge Joestar? What are you talking about? That's his body, it's fucking gross! Julia wailed. Suku nodded. That too is correct, but it's not the whole truth. A stir went through the room, but by this time we were all under Suku's spell. This is a work of art created by Antonio's mother, Maria Torres. She made it by peeling off her son's skin. The bones and blood and flesh were not removed. Rather, the skin alone was peeled away, carefully placed together with adhesive, and hair shed over the past few months placed carefully on the head to complete the full body work of art. This year's Antonio, she called it. This was too much for all of us. I nearly forgot to breathe. His voice shaking, Julio asked, But if his skin was peeled off, wouldn't Antonio die? Normally, yes, if it was all done at once, Suku said, not at all perturbed. So at first, she would peel it away bit by bit, treat it with oil and sew the pieces together with very fine thread. But the result was rather patchwork, and the lines where it was sewn tended to bunch up, and it was obvious which pieces of skin had been harvested freshly. Early versions weren't what you call beautiful. Maria adapted her technique, and her son's body adapted to survive it. Julio swallowed. You mean there's more than one? Yes. She's been making one a year since Antonio was a baby. So including this year's, there are 12 in all. The early ones are not well done, but starting with last year's, they became rather remarkable. This year's in particular is a bona fide masterpiece. With Julio at a loss for words, someone else mumbled, So horrible. His own mum. How could she? It's unnatural. Her love for her son was hardly natural, Suku said. Since the invention of the photograph, Kodak cameras have become readily available. La Palma may not have a camera shop, but there's one in Santa Cruz de Tenerife. But Maria wanted the skin. It was the texture she loved, I suppose. No photograph can preserve that. Before the police took her away, Maria ran her cheek against it, desperately trying to savour her last moments with her art. I could hear several of my classmates throwing up, their vomit splattering on the floor, yet those next to them failed to react in any way. I was staring closely at this year's Antonio, but I couldn't see any sewing or patches at all. Were they on the inside? But I didn't dare touch it to see. It's beautiful, isn't it? Suku said, standing beside me. There's only one seam in it, running down his back from his neck to his rear. Huh? But isn't this a skin quilt? A quilt. That's one way of putting it. But that only applies to the early ones. Like I said, she improved her technique, and her son's body adapted to it. Every summer his mother would peel off his skin. Even if she was careful not to peel enough to kill him, stripping random pieces off would have been very painful. He needed some defense against this. All cells in the human body are replaced every 7 years, but our skin is replaced once a month. And in Antonio Torres' case, 3 days before June 16th, Maria's customary skinning day, his skin cell production would speed up. All Maria needed to do was make a single incision along his back, and Antonio could slip out of his old skin. His new skin would be thin, but fully grown. He could shed his old skin like a snake. Then Maria would apply a thick coating of oil to the cast-off skin, inside and out, to prevent it drying out, and seal the rear incision with medical adhesive. That's how this year's Antonio was made, he said, like a way to explaining a recipe. So the real Antonio Torres is still alive? I asked. If this wasn't a corpse, but a cast-off skin, then the rest of Antonio must be somewhere, and I would have to form a new strategy for avoiding him. Tsukumojuku sighed awkwardly. I assumed he was. He turned to face the classroom door. You may enter, he said. May? Quite the haughty choice of words. I turned to look at the door as it opened, Antonio Torres was standing there, expressionless. His comrade Julio took a step forward to greet him. But, "Wait! Stay back!" Suku's bark was so loud Julio jumped and froze in his tracks. I was certainly on edge at being seemingly confronted by a not-so-dead Antonio, but at the same time, something seemed wrong. Antonio usually laughed raucously, talked down to me, his friends and grown-ups, bossing everyone around. He was always on the move, never settling down, his eyes sending sharp glances in all directions. Now he just stood there in the door, vacantly, doing nothing. I'd never seen him so still. Normally Antonio would have burst in the door, and he would never have waited outside, even if Tsuku ordered him to. But here he was, standing silently, not moving at all. Even as I wondered, Tsuku said, "You didn't say a single word to me on the way to school, Antonio. I assumed you were in shock. Your mother had just been arrested after all. But I was wrong, wasn't I? I thought you smelled a little ripe, but good manners prevented me saying anything. This too was a mistake. Were there, in fact, 2 versions of this year's Antonio?" The thing standing there was not Antonio alive. I knew that. Antonio would never act like this. "Would the person inside kindly step out?" Tsuku said. The rest of the class finally realized the thing in front of us was someone else wearing Antonio's skin. Julio and his cronies all took a big step back. "I have a very good sense of smell. Despite the stench of the skin, I can clearly smell the shampoo you've used," Tsuku said. "I can't name the brand, but it's the same shampoo Jorge Joestar uses." "Huh? What?" I stammered. Antonio Torres sighed. "There are things you're better off not knowing, detective," a girl's voice said. A voice I knew. "I didn't want to frighten the children," she said. Antonio's black back split open, and Elizabeth Straits emerged from within. "Ah!" The whole class screamed. I couldn't scream. As she came out of Antonio's skin, Lisa looked so beautiful. Even more beautiful than I'd thought the night before. Wow, Lisa really is amazing, I thought. A strange realization that left me weirdly calm. Tsuku said nothing, but his eyes shone with keen interest, watching her closely. She tossed Antonio Torres aside, wearing nothing but a corset and her underwear, nearly naked but not at all embarrassed. She seemed supremely comfortable. She was like the woman in the theatre or printed advertisements, just smaller and not yet as curvy. "What's going on here?" "Everyone stay quiet, I'll take care of this," Mr. Hernandez said, and went out into the brightly lit hall. Lisa ignored him. She pulled her dress out of Antonio's bag and put it on. "My name is Elizabeth Straits," she said. "I'm a student at this school, a year ahead of you. What I'm about to say is very important. The person who murdered Antonio Torres is hiding somewhere nearby. The police and militia are searching for him, but we will need all of your help. We won't ask you to do anything difficult or dangerous. Quite the opposite. For your own safety, follow these simple instructions to the letter. First, you will all be summoned into the yard, where they will explain exactly what I'm about to say. From there you must go straight home. Don't stop to play, and make sure you pick a route that will keep you in direct sunlight the entire way. You are not to stop anywhere. Don't go in any shops, don't go to your friends' homes, don't step in the shade of any trees, and avoid going near the coast at all costs. I say this because we know the killer will be hiding in the shadows during the day. To remain safe, it's important that you all remain in the sunlight and go straight home. Whatever you see, and whoever invites you to join them, pay no attention. Just go home." Lisa had her fist held out in front of her, her index finger raised. We listened in silence, but the meaning of her words were lost on us. The heat of summer was finally dying down, and all of us wanted to play outside. I had to avoid the main play spots like the park or the beach for fear of bullies, but even so I wanted to at least go to the library or candy store. But Lisa raised another finger, oblivious to our discontent. "Secondly, once you have reached your homes, without ever leaving the sunlight, lock all the doors and windows. Don't step outside again. If anyone knocks, do not open the doors. Don't even answer. Sit absolutely still, not making a sound until they give up and go away. No matter how well you know them. No matter how rude you feel this is. Today alone, you must do this. The police have given everyone these same instructions, so anyone knocking should know better. Today is a day when nobody except your family is allowed inside your homes. Today you must all play quietly at home. Except if the doors and windows were all shut, it would get unbearably hot. And staying at home sounded very boring. Others in the class were starting to grumble, but Lisa ignored them. Third, once the sun goes down, let no one in, not even family. If anyone fails to get home before sundown, then gather in the centre of the house with everyone who did come home and hide. If the missing people or anyone else arrive, don't speak to them. Don't answer if they call. Stay hidden till morning. Once the sun has fully risen, sneak out of the house and go to the police station or find a policeman or militiaman patrolling. Lisa now had 3 fingers raised, and her orders were becoming so unreasonable the grumbling grew louder. Be quiet and listen, Lisa snapped. Everyone shut up instantly. Fourth, she said, raising her last finger. At some point this evening, you may hear a commotion from a house near yours. Loud voices, sounds of fighting, even screams. Don't go and see what's going on. If you hear strange sounds or voices, do exactly as I said before. Hide in the centre of the house with your family and wait for morning. Don't speak to anyone. Don't make any sound. Wait for sunrise. What was going to happen tonight? As the meaning of Lisa's instructions settled in, panic spread. Some of the girls started to cry. Are you done? Tsuku asked. He'd been listening attentively this whole time. Yes. So, someone murdered Antonio Torres. This someone is weak to sunlight, but once the sun has set, there is a strong chance they will attack others at random, he said, summing up the facts. Now I was starting to get scared. Tonight was going to be really scary. Lisa is super cool, but also super vague, and not exactly building my confidence. So what are you? Tsuku asked. Since this year's Antonio is here, the skin you wore must be Antonio Torres' actual corpse. Ugh, I didn't want to believe it. I looked down at the skin on the floor. Why would she do something so horrible? You made it look as if Antonio Torres was still alive. Not for my benefit, Tsuku continued. You were trying to catch the killer's attention and confuse him. Yes, and not just that. You were also trying to lure him out of hiding. Exactly. That it appears to be working. Your sunlight-hating killer is already here. Lisa turned, following his gaze. The hallway had been drenched in sunlight a minute ago, but was now dark and gloomy. The curtains had been pulled. We could hear the sound of more curtains being pulled down the hall. As scared as I was, somehow I found myself opening the door and looking out into the hall. The man closing all the curtains was Mr. Hernandez. Why would he... Mr. Hernandez! I called. He stopped in the sunlight, his hand on a curtain, and turned towards me. There were cracks running across his face. Pieces of it were crumbling away. There was a big hole in his forehead. The girls behind me began to shriek. Mr. Hernandez! What's going on? He closed the curtain. As he moved into the sunlight to close the next, his face crumbled further. Not just his head, his entire body was crumbling away. This wasn't weak to sunlight. The sun was killing him. As we watched him close the curtains, Tsuku spoke to Lisa. So Antonio really did have his blood and flesh and bones sucked out. Now what exactly could do that to him? I was working on the assumption that nobody could. But that simply means no human could. But that assumption was wrong, wasn't it? We're not dealing with a human. Let me ask again. You summoned this thing here. So what are you? What power do you have? I turned to look at her. I didn't know this Lisa. She looked right at me. Since I was a tiny baby, I've been able to breathe in a special way. Just like my adopted father. And your father, George. What? I asked. I never heard of this before. As a baby, I found myself in a situation even more dangerous than this one. I think I chose to learn how to breathe like this to protect myself. Breathe how? My breathing gives me power, George. I promise I'll protect you. This made no sense, but she flashed a smile at me and stepped past me into the hall. The last curtain had been drawn, and the hall was shrouded in darkness. Mr. Hernandez stood perfectly still, clutching the last curtain. He was clearly no longer alive. His head was completely gone, his left arm had fallen off, his wrist had crumbled, and his guts fallen on the floor, and the rest of him was crumbling into dust. He was dead, and he'd been dead the whole time he was closing the curtains. I had no idea how this could be, but I knew Mr. Hernandez had been human when he was with us, and I knew he had been desperate to close those curtains, but closing the curtains had killed him, so I'd been closing those for someone else, someone who hated sunlight, who had killed Mr. Hernandez and forced him to make a path. I'd never imagined anything like this possible, but I knew it was true. "George, take a few steps back, please," Lisa said, staring into the darkness. "If you get too close, you'll get shocked." "Oh?" I took a step back, but Tsuku stood his ground. When I glanced at him, he said, "Experience is everything." I was scared, but I couldn't tear my eyes off Lisa. "He's here," she said, her eyes narrowing. Hmm? Tsuku said, peering into the depths of the hall. "Did Antonio have an older brother?" "No." "What are you—" "There's a young man who looks like Antonio Torres standing on the ceiling." "What?" I wanted to see, but I wasn't going out there. I couldn't move a muscle. "Senorita," a voice said, apparently addressing Lisa. The voice had a strange sweetness to it that made me feel dizzy. "Have you seen my son?" "Son?" "He's all right looking, but such an awful brat. I didn't like his guts, so I ate him whole, but then I heard he went to school this morning. I know he can't be alive, so this is quite odd." "He ate him?" I looked down at the floor where Antonio's skin lay. "You mean the little turd that picked on my brother?" Lisa said. Her voice was trembling. "Don't worry, he's dead." "Is he? Was I mistaken?" "I think he's better off dead. I mean, his mother's a pervert who enjoyed peeling his skin off, and his father's such a terrible dad he ate his own son. Dying must have been a relief." The man fell silent, but I heard a sound. "Alejandro Torres, if you had been a better father, my precious Jorge Joestar might never have been tormented by your piece of shit son. You'll pay the price for that." Suddenly I remembered the promise I'd made last night. The only way to stop being scared was to start being brave. I was a boy and couldn't keep relying on a girl my whole life. Yet here I was, cowering behind Lisa's back.